Good evening. Thank you so much for attending tonight's webinar on the Illinois Fair Tax Amendment. I would like to start out by just stating that the League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization. We do not support or oppose candidates for public office. We do, however, take positions on important public issues such as the Fair Tax Amendment. League of Women Voters of Naperville and League of Women Voters of Illinois support the Fair Tax Amendment. We are so pleased tonight to have some very distinguished speakers that are here to address all sorts of questions that you might have. Please note that you can use the Q&A function on the bottom toolbar in Zoom, and they will address as many of your questions tonight. Now let me start by just briefly introducing our featured speakers. So I'm going to start with Jean Pierce. So Jean serves as Issues and Advocacy Co-Chair for the League of Women Voters of Illinois. The League she has advocated for a fair tax for over 50 years, and Jean has been an advocate for the past 6 years, during which time she has served with Ann as an educational funding specialist. Now we'll talk about we'll talk about Ann. So Ann has served as the League of Women Voter of Illinois Issue Specialist for Education and Fiscal Policy. She is on the steering committee for the Vote Yes for Fair Tax ballot, and she has worked as an attorney for many years. She was elected to 2 terms on the school board for the Oak Park District 97, and she holds a JD from Yale and an MA in Social Sciences from the University of Chicago. So please take it away.
Okay. Okay, thank you for inviting us tonight. As was mentioned, the League has been supporting a graduated rate income tax for the past 50 years, and now more than ever, it's needed. So here's what we're going to be talking about tonight. First, what's wrong with our current tax system? What is the fair tax? What will it do for us? And how do we help it pass? Now, first of all, we're appearing as members of a coalition. We work with faith groups, with human service groups, with a variety of different organizations to try to pass the fair tax. We hope that through programs like this, we can educate the public about what it is. So first of all, what's wrong with the current system? As a friend of ours said recently, the current system is not efficient, it's not sufficient, and it exacerbates income inequality and racial inequality, and in addition, it's bad tax policy. So it's unfair. It's unfair because it's falling too heavily on the middle class and those struggling to get there. We'll see how this works in a few minutes. And it's inadequate because it's caused budget deficits that push up property taxes and has forced cuts to schools, public services, and jobs. Ever since 1970, Illinois' Constitution has required all income taxpayers to pay the same rate, regardless of a family's income and ability to pay. So currently, a family making $25,000 and a family making $25 million are paying the same income tax rate. Because this is written into the Constitution, we can't modernize our tax system so that higher incomes would pay higher rates and lower incomes would pay lower rates. Now let's see why this is important. In the past 40 years, here's where the only economic growth has been. The top 1% has seen an increase in their income of 254%, whereas the bottom 99% has seen an increase in their income of only 20%. And if we look at the bottom 90%, they've actually had a decrease of 8% in the same time period. So now we see where the income growth has been, and yet when we look at the current total state and local tax burden, now this means income tax, excise tax, property tax, sales tax, service tax, the whole 9 yards. Our lowest 20% of income earners are paying over 14% of their income in these state and local taxes, whereas the top 1%, which is the only sector to have seen sizable growth in income in the past 40 years, is seeing paying only 7.4% of their income in these same taxes. It doesn't make sense that our lowest income earners would be paying almost twice the amount rate-wise as our top percent. And as I said, it's inadequate. It's not bringing in sufficient money to fund core services. So Ann and I are particularly interested in education funding. The state currently is only paying about 27% of the cost of public education, compared to other states, which are paying on average 47% of the cost. Now, the federal government picks up about 9% of the cost, but where does the rest of this come from? Well, it's left up to the local municipalities. So that's why your property taxes are, sky high. Uh-oh. Okay, so currently 66% of the cost of education in Illinois, public education, is being covered by property taxes, as opposed to other states that only 45% of the cost of public education is being covered by their property taxes. So because the state is underfunding core services, the only way to get adequate funding is through local municipal property taxes. And certainly not all zip codes are capable of paying increased property taxes. And this is why the level of education you get in our state depends on where you live. In addition to education cuts, since 2000, Illinois is ranking near the bottom for state reimbursement of mental health, senior services, foster care, and so on. Healthcare providers have struggled to serve patients. 40,000 low-income children are not receiving the child care they need. 7,500 higher ed jobs have been lost. Half of our high school graduates are looking outside of the state for higher ed rather than inside of the state. This is a dramatic change over the last 10 years. And it's because higher ed has been cut about 50% since the year 2000. So we've had serious cuts in these core services. In addition, the Environmental Protection Agency has been drastically cut. In 2003, they hired over 1,200 employees. In 2018, only about half that many. So they do not have the resources to monitor pollution of air, of water, of the ground. And this is seriously impacting everyone, but particularly low-income citizens, that they feel this lack of monitoring even more intensely. So let's pause here. Anne, are there some questions that have been asked so far that we could address?
I don't see anything at all, Jean, in the chat box. So I would encourage people as they think of things to just go ahead and write it right in there. So nothing is showing up. So
okay, we'll go on. Right, I'm sure that more questions will be inspired as we go along. So over the right here, you can see the types of services that are funded by the state: schools, public health, child care, parks, Medicaid, and so on and so forth. One thing that we're encouraging people to do is to develop a personal story about how the budget cuts have affected you, your family, your friends. And this has a huge impact on people. So let me share my personal story with you. I have a 6-year-old hearing impaired grandson. By the time he's an adult, he will be totally deaf. So the education that he gets now at this time in his life is incredibly important. And yet he lives in a school district that has only 60% adequate funding. So it's not likely that he's going to get the level of education that he could get if he lived in another district. So that has me very concerned. And in fact, it has his parents very concerned. And they wound up taking him out of the public school and putting him into a private school. This really pains me because I'm a total believer in public education. So think about ways that cutbacks in funding or underfunding have affected you, your family, your friends. As I say, telling powerful stories like this about how the state needs more revenue in order to address its core services can be very powerful. So what is the fair tax? This is not some bizarre new concept. A majority of states already have this. They use a fair tax system, including a majority of our neighboring states. And the federal government uses it. This is what you're accustomed to with the IRS. In fact, we are one of only 4 states to mandate a flat tax in our state constitution. And as we said, this has hamstrung our legislature. So here's what you're going to be asked to vote on. It's not going to be called the fair tax. If you vote by mail, this will be on a separate piece of paper. If you go into a polling place, we've been assured that it will be at the top of the ballot. It's possible it will be at the end of the ballot, but it's very important that you make sure that you vote on the constitutional amendment. These are the most important words right here. The amendment would remove the portion of the revenue article of the Illinois Constitution that's sometimes referred to as a flat tax that requires all taxes on income to be at the same rate. So there's 2 things to be aware of here. Number 1, it is not eliminating the flat tax. If the legislature decided in the future that they wanted to reimpose a flat tax, that would be a possibility. Voting yes expands the options. It expands it so that it would be possible to have a graduated rate income tax which responds to where the only economic growth has been. The other thing to be aware of is that what you're voting on does not include the rate structure. The rates are fixed by the legislature, and they passed a bill a year ago that set the rates, and we'll talk about what those are later on. So we are only voting on removing the requirement that income has to be taxed at a flat rate. And we want you to vote yes. So what will it mean for us? It means that at least 97% of the people in Illinois will see no income tax increase. A majority of middle and low income families will receive a modest tax cut. In fact, only those earning more than $250,000 a year will pay increased income taxes. So the point is, this will be responsive to where the only economic growth has been. Now, here's the rate structure that was passed a year ago. As with the federal IRS, the lowest bracket is taxed at the lowest rate. So the first $10,000 that you earn will be taxed at a rate of 4.75%. The first dollar that you earn over $10,000 on up to $100,000 will be taxed at the next rate, 4.90%, and so on. Now, where this is going to change is where you reach this level of $250,000. Recognize currently our flat tax is 4.95%. Recognize also we have 1 column for single filers, 1 column for joint filers. And over here we can see the percentages of taxpayers which fall in each of the brackets. So when you get over 250,000, your first dollar over 250,000 will be taxed at a rate of 7.75%. Now, for the top income earners, this is the top 0.3%. If you're filing as a single filer on $750,001, then your whole income will be taxed at a rate of 7.99%. If you're joint filers and you're making over $1 million, your whole income will be taxed at the rate of 7.99%. So in a sense, for our very top 0.3%, it would be a flat tax for them. In addition to this rate structure, when the bill was passed, it expands the property tax credit from 5% to 6%, and it implements a child tax credit up to $100 per child for children under 17 for families making $100,000 or less. So these also will go into effect if the amendment passes and the rate structure bill goes into effect. You can see how your family would benefit from this if you go to bit.ly/FIT, Fair Income Tax Calculator. So that's bit.ly/FIT calculator. You can put in the situation for your family and find out how much will you save, what will your income tax be with the rates that have been passed. Now here's how it compares to our neighboring states for the middle class. So currently, as I said, our flat tax is 4.95%. With the new rates, not too much of a change for our middle class and lower class, frankly. But when you look at Missouri, their middle class is paying more than our middle class is currently with our flat tax. If you look at Kentucky, now you can hardly see them because their flat tax is 5%, just a teeny bit over our 4.95%. In Indiana, they too have a flat tax, but Indiana's a little deceptive. Not only do they have a state income tax, they also have county income taxes. So this line represents if you live in Indianapolis, in Marion County, you would be paying a higher income tax than if you live in Chicago. Here's the tax structure for Wisconsin for the middle class and for Iowa. So even though most of us will not be paying anything additional in taxes with the rate structure, the fair tax will bring in $3 billion for funding for education, for jobs, for public safety, for human services, and for health care. So are there questions that have been asked at this point, Anne?
Yes, we have quite a few. It's just maybe the first one to address is why we ended up in this place in the first place. Why does our state constitution require a flat tax? What was the logic around that?
Logic. Well, it was passed with negotiations 50 years ago. I understand that it was in part a way of appeasing downstaters who thought that they were not going to get a fair deal unless they had a flat tax. But as I say, the league for all that time has said, no, this is not the way to go. And in fact, when you look at the father of capitalism, Adam Smith, he too said, you know what, you really need to tax the higher income earners at a higher rate and lower income earners at a lower rate.
Okay, and there's another good question. Why is there so much opposition to the fair tax, especially from small businesses?
Well, that's a good question. Anne can particularly address the small business. I guess the way I would look at this is to say, you know, if you really were opposed to this and you were trying to convince 97% of the people in Illinois to vote against their best interests, how would you do it? Well, to me, that means you're going to result to fear mongering, and that's what we're seeing in the ads. So, Anne, why don't you take a minute to talk about small businesses and farmers?
Sure. Yeah. Somebody asked me to start my video, and I guess I'll do that. So you can see not a disembodied voice emerging. I'm here. I think there's a lot of misinformation out there is kind of the basic answer about why there's so much opposition, because if the facts were well known, I don't think there would be so much opposition. There are a few ways that small businesses in Illinois, there's 1.2 million of them, there's different ways that they are organized. Some are partnerships, sole proprietorships, S corporations, or C corporations. C corporations are largely the great big industries. It may include a few farms, but by and large, it's a very small number of businesses are C corporations. For that small number of corporations, there will be an increase in their flat rate tax from 7% to 7.99%. That's only for C corporations. For the vast majority of small businesses, they pay taxes as a pass-through entity into the individual income tax returns of their owners. So that will show up as individual income tax returns, and if they are making in profit more than $250,000, then they would pay a higher rate along with individuals who are earning that kind of a salary, according to that marginal tax rate graduated structure. So if they're making $300,000 in profits, they would pay a higher rate only on $50,000 of that profit. But for the majority, the vast majority of small businesses will see no increase and possibly a small rate cut, a tax cut. So I think if that were more widely known, small businesses would be excited about the fair tax, not only because they might get a tax break, but also because it can put more money in the pockets of low and middle income earners in their communities who will have money to spend at their businesses. It will help to create a more thriving community. It will provide better education for their workers. It will lay the conditions for a thriving small business environment. So
the other thing is, I think we're hearing some squeaking wheels that are very loud. There was a poll that was reported in Cranes recently, which said that 55% of small business owners were definitely in favor of the fair tax. So I think the opposition is inflated.
Yeah, there's another question about property taxes. You pointed out that education funding has been shirked by the state and picked up by local property taxpayers. Will that now go down with more funding for education?
Well, it's not going to go down unless the state gets more resources. That we can guarantee. That the first step is to raise more revenue, and then you have a possibility of seeing a break in the property taxes. Several years ago, the evidence-based funding model was passed by the legislature. They promised to increase funding by $350 million every year, increase it over the previous amount for the previous year. This year, because of COVID, they were not able to keep their promise. We had started to see a little bit more adequate, a little bit more equitable funding in education in Illinois, presumably after we're out from under the onus of COVID, they will be able to return to their promise to increase funding. But unless the state increases its share, the only group that can pick up the difference are the local municipalities.
So over time, we expect that it will go down, but it's not a direct one-for-one trade-off immediately. But we think it's probably an essential first step in reducing the high property taxes that are paid in Illinois. There's another question about the wealthy moving out of Illinois. Is that a really is that a realistic fear? And I am going to put a link in the answer and send it out to everyone, setting the record straight on Illinois migration. There's been a study by the Center on Tax and Budget Accountability that shows that, in fact, the wealthy do not move out of states when taxes go up. Businesses do not leave a state if there is an income tax increase. There is no correlation there. And other studies have shown that in terms of who is actually leaving Illinois, it is the low and middle income families, often of color, who are not receiving adequate education and not getting good services. And so they are going to places where they think they can find those things. So the idea that passing the fair tax will cause wealthy people to leave the state is a myth, I would say.
I recognize that many of the wealthy people go to California. Of course, you wouldn't want to do that right now because of the wildfires, but there's still, you know, for 8 months of the year, it's a very attractive place to live. And yet they would be paying over 13% of their income in taxes if they lived in California. So, you know, there is no correlation. The wealthy can afford to live wherever they want to live, and many of them they are wealthy because of the benefits they've gotten in the state. They've developed their company here. Now they want customers and they want employees who are satisfied and will stay here. And so they need a fair tax as much as the rest of us do.
Okay, there's another question about, you know, way back at the beginning about the presentation where we talked about what was deleted will be deleted from the Constitution. And there is a line that will be deleted, not only restricting the tax to a flat rate, but there's also a line that says that there cannot be more than one such tax imposed by the state. And so that will also be deleted. And the question is, what does that mean? And what we have been told by Senator Harman, who was involved with the negotiations for the constitutional amendment, is that they were concerned that if they kept that language in there, that there would be a challenge to having a graduated rate structure. And so it doesn't add anything if we have a graduated rate structure. So it basically doesn't do anything nefarious. It just cleans it up a little bit.
So there is no threat that we will be paying more than income taxes more than once every year. You know, it has nothing to do with that. They were simply worried that the wording would be construed that you couldn't have graduated.
Yeah, so we don't see that as an issue. There was a question about the marriage penalty. So I dug into this a little bit today. There are a number of states that have a marriage penalty. I think it's 15 states have a marriage penalty, which means simply that you've got one set of tax bracket for whether you're married or single. So if you live in a household with 2 earners, if you could file as single people, you might end up paying, say you make $200,000, you know, lucky you. So you're making $200,000 each. So if you are each paying as individuals, then you would be paying 4.95% as your top rate. If your incomes are combined, so now you're making $400,000, you're bumped into the higher bracket. And then you're paying an additional amount on $150,000. So that is viewed as a penalty. Many states impose this kind of thing. Many states do not. Illinois kind of took a middle road. They do have 2 columns. There are 2 bracket levels, so that if you're paying, oh, I don't have it in front of me.
Do you want me to go back?
Oh yeah, why don't you? Because
Okay.
this isn't that hard, but I can never remember the exact numbers. I don't want to misquote it. But basically, you can make $350,000 and or $1 million. Yeah. So Illinois cuts it in half. There's a little bit of a marriage penalty, but not as much as there would be if they didn't have those double lanes.
And it, as Ann said, you could opt to both of you file as single filers. Now, I do know I've had a preview of what Ralph is going to be talking about tomorrow night. And I know that he's going to be addressing this issue. So I strongly encourage people to tune into the League's webinar tomorrow night to hear Ralph Martiri address this as well.
Okay. So there's another question about, is it fair to say that the high earners are the ones encouraging people to vote no? Or do people not understand the question?
I think there are big bucks coming from the high income earners. There's no doubt about it. There's huge money being invested by the Illinois Policy Institute, which is mainly funded by former Governor Rounder, by the remaining Koch brother, by Ken Griffin. So yeah, they're, you know, in a sense, it's the battle of the billionaires, that you have Pritzker on one side that's fighting for the fair tax. Recognize that for the most, you know, the League is not part of the Vote Yes for Fairness, Pritzker's organization. We're part of the Vote Yes for Fair Tax. So we are not apologists, let's say, for the governor. We're going our own way.
This is another interesting question. What is the current opposition to the fair tax if most residents will not be affected? And that's true, 97% will not pay more and yet benefit with more tax funding. Why has this taken so long to push through?
That's a darn good question.
Such a good question.
I'd encourage you to look at a fact sheet that Ann and I wrote, and last week you got a time for action from the State League, which referenced our fact sheet. When you go on the State League's website and you click on fair tax, you'll see under the resources from September 9th fact sheet. And basically point for point, we are addressing each of the fear-mongering issues that have been addressed in the various ads. Many of them you are asking about tonight, about will the wealthy flee? Will this hurt small business partners and so on? But it's fear mongering. You know, I mean, we can tell you what will happen. We know what the rate structure is. We know what will happen if this passes. What you're hearing from the other side is, what if that, you know what, it maybe retirement is going to start being taxed. Well, you know what? The AARP is a strong supporter of the fair tax because they are convinced that retirement is not going to be taxed. It doesn't need to be taxed if the state brings in more revenue. So, you know, as I say, it's fear mongering. It's not dealing with what will happen. It's dealing with what if, and trying to get people scared.
And if you really look closely at the arguments, it's just as likely that the legislators have signaled that they are trying to protect the low and middle class by passing the rate schedule that they did, that taxing lower incomes at higher rates is the last thing they want to do.
Plus, the last thing they can do in COVID, I mean, you're trying to get blood from a stone. There's nothing there. The only segment of society really which can pay higher taxes is the top 3%.
And the final answer from the league is that it's on us to make sure that we're communicating with our elected representatives, that we're letting them know exactly what we want to see in our tax system, that we know how it will impact us in terms of the services that we will get and also how we will pay for them. And we will let them know what we would like them to do as our representatives. So it's not a matter of just handing over a brand new system. This is the way it works today. We tell our legislators exactly what we would like to see and how we would like to pay for it. So that won't change under the fair tax system at all. So it's not a matter of trust, it's a matter of us doing the work and communicating. But there are lots of good questions tonight. This is great. So I think we've answered the issue about pensions being taxed. They will not be taxed under the fair tax, and it's less likely that it will be if this passes. I hope that's real clear. And then there's a question, how do you counter that flat is fair? Because everyone should pay the same amount. It's not that, yeah, so.
Well, you go back to the chart that we had with the flat taxes, and you can see that it winds up, let's see if I can go back to that one. Oops, here we go. Okay. That this is the heart of our argument, that it's not fair, that this is based on flat taxes, and currently the lowest 20% is paying over 14% of their income in these state and local taxes. Well, how can this be? Because they're spending practically everything that they make. And the sales tax is the same for everybody. And so they're paying a whole lot of their income for sales tax, for property tax, and so on. Whereas for the top 1%, they're not spending everything that they make. It's not the same ballpark for them at all. But when we make a fair income tax more fair, then you'll see this column increase to over 10%. So we're going to be closing the gap. That it will not be so obscenely discrepant.
Okay. Let's see. Should we argue that the 1% will have a dog in the fight against corruption if they have money going into the pot? I'm not sure.
I think what the point is saying that the lowest 20%, it's not that they're not going to be paying taxes. They're still paying taxes. That there's some kind of a perception that they won't have any investment in the state or any interest, and so I realize I just twisted the wording, but I'm answering the question that I think was being asked, not the way that it was asked.
Okay, let's see. There's an issue about this is a Band-Aid on the deficit problem, and the state will continue to need more funds, especially for the pension liability that's accrued. And they could raise the rates again. What do you say to that?
So what we've seen, number one, this is not going to cure all the ills of the state. It's an essential first step. And we strongly encourage you to tune in tomorrow night to hear Ralph Martiri's webinar for the League of Women Voters at 7 p.m. And when I stop sharing my screen, I might be able to share that link with you. And he will be talking about his approach for how we can deal with the pension debt. That is another issue. It will continue being an issue whether or not this passes. With the fair tax, we are going to raise $3 billion. If the fair tax does not pass, the state is still going to need $3 billion. How is it going to get it? There is a strong possibility that the flat tax would be increased on everyone if the fair tax amendment does not pass. And that means that everyone, in order to raise $3 billion, that would mean an increase of 1% from 4.95% up to 5.95% in order to raise the same amount. So the state needs money, and what we're saying is this is the only fair way of doing it.
Okay. There's another question about what the states around us are doing. For example, do they tax pensions, which we do not? And I can tell you that there are only 3 states which exempt all retirement income: Illinois, Mississippi, and Pennsylvania. You sometimes hear that if we go to a graduated rate system, that will make it more likely that that you will see a tax on retirement income. But in fact, of the 38 states that do, or actually 41 plus DC, do tax retirement income, it's like most states. There are 9 of those, 9 states with flat taxes, and 6 of them tax retirement income. So having a flat tax and not retiring pensions there's no correlation there. There's no cause and effect. So going to a graduated rate system doesn't make it any more likely, just because we have a new structure, a graduated rate structure. It doesn't make it more likely that we will tax pensions.
Every state has dealt with trying to raise revenue in different ways. The states around us, practically all of them, have much higher service taxes than Illinois does. Illinois does very little in the way of taxing services. Looking at the tax systems of states is a very complex issue, and it's not just a one-to-one trade-off.
Okay, so there's, let's say, it says, you mentioned the highest earners will pay around 10% of their income in state taxes.
State and local.
Well, state and local, actually the highest earners currently are paying only about 7% of their income in state and local taxes. That will go up somewhat with the
fair tax rates, that it would go up to, Ralph has indicated it would go up to over 10%.
Then the question is, do you have a similar estimate about the impact on the lowest earners?
Well, yeah, Ann and I have cautioned people against saying, yes, there will be a decrease for anyone making less than $250,000. You will see your income taxes go down. For many of us, we would consider the amount that it's going down to be relatively minimal. For the lowest 20%, the amount that it goes down will be something that makes a real difference for them, because once again, they're spending everything that they make. So we encourage you to look at that bit.ly/FIT calculator to find out how it would impact your family.
Yeah, and there are additional child tax credits, for example, and property tax credits. So it will in fact go down.
Right.
So Rebecca has corrected me. I mentioned that there's only 3 states that do not tax retirement income. I should have said there are 3 states of those that do have an income tax. There are also 9 states with no income taxes, which include Alaska, Florida, Nevada, South Dakota, Texas, Washington, Wyoming, Tennessee, and New Hampshire tax dividends, but not income. So I did misspeak, so thank you for that correction. But of the taxes of the states with income taxes, there is no real correlation about whether they tax pensions or not, whether they're flat or graduated. Yeah, so I think that answers the question about whether states around us tax pensions, because they pretty much all do. Another question about the lottery. We were just in Peoria earlier this evening and got that same question. So I'm going to let Jean answer this one.
So what we understand is that, yeah, 50% of the funds that came from the lottery did indeed go to education. That yeah, the state, because the state has a history of not wanting to increase taxes, they wound up using the funds for other important core services rather than increasing the funding for education the way that we had been led to believe. But to me, what happened with the lottery is a real indication of the fact that our legislators are very hesitant to increase taxes on us. And that's why they wound up using 50% of the money that came in from the lottery for purposes other than what we had been led to believe.
Yeah, I'm going to ask for your forbearance. This is the first time I've used a Q&A function. I usually am more conversant with the chat function. So if I dismiss your question, it's because I don't know what I'm doing with the Q&A function. And feel free to ask again if we don't get to it. I apologize. And so I think we're getting to the end of this. Somebody points out that the budget this year passed a whole lot of increases in taxes, which are regressive and have a higher impact on lower income people. And I heard Daniel Biss answer that question in a forum in Vernon Hills, I think it was, where he said that's because the legislature had no other way of raising money except to raise taxes in a regressive way. So once we've got a graduated rate income tax possibility by this constitutional amendment change, we should, they will be very glad for an alternative to imposing those regressive taxes.
Yeah, currently, as we said, they're hamstrung. They can only impose flat taxes. And so if we can get a graduated rate income tax, it's going to make a big difference.
Okay, and finally, there's a question about, has the league considered countering some of the bad information with an op-ed in the Tribune? And the Vote Yes for Fairness campaign did have an op-ed placed by Quentin Folks, who's the chair of the Vote Yes for Fairness campaign. We have league members writing and publishing letters to the editor around the state. Very excited about our record in doing that. Jean and I had a nice letter put into the Daily Herald a couple months ago. I think it's time for another one.
Well, so we submitted our bulleted fact sheet from last week to the Vote Yes for Fair Tax, that because we're part of a coalition that we feel as if we need to make sure that we're coordinating with them for the Tribune. Now, as far as other newspapers go, that we encourage league members to develop your own, and you're welcome to develop it based on the bulleted fact sheet that we came out with last week. Our only request is please do share it with us before you submit it for publication. We have had a few overzealous members who have made some claims that can come back to bite you. So please do share it. So just send it to issues@lwvil.org, and we'll get, believe me, we're on the computer 24/7, so we'll get back to you right away.
Yeah, someday we're going to have a life. I can't wait. So here's a new question. Are there any polls or surveys that say that the fair tax amendment is mostly supported by Illinoisans? As Jean noted, Cranes did a survey, I think it was last week, of small and medium sized business executives, and 55% were in support of the fair tax. Various campaigns are doing surveys and polls. I'm sure
Well,
the opposition is as well.
Right.
And
We've heard that 59% of the people do support the fair tax. So,
yeah.
so the
And
point is,
I did hear a higher number today
all right.
that showed that we are over the finish line.
Well,
if the numbers stay where they should be, where they are, you know.
I'm
it's
always
still-
concerned, frankly, with
Yeah.
saying, hey, we made it over the finish line, because then people say, okay, maybe I don't have to vote on it. So I kind of prefer we're at 59%.
Yeah,
We need your support.
fair enough. We absolutely do need your support, and we need you to talk to your neighbors. We need you to talk to your friends. We need you to sign the endorsement form that we should be putting out.
Right. So why don't I proceed to the end and share some of these things with you. So as we said, it has to be approved by voters in the election by a yes vote of more than 50% of those voting in the election, or by a yes vote of more than 60% of those who are voting on the question. So let's look at what this means. If you have 200 people voting in the election, I hope we have a few more than that, but if you only have 200 people in Illinois voting in the election, and 100 of them vote on the constitutional amendment, and 61 of those vote yes. Well, we have not got more than 100 of our 200 voting yes. So we haven't met the first criteria, but we have met the second criterion, a yes vote of more than 60% of those voting on the question. So we really, really need you. We're convinced a number of people are going to see a whole bunch of words and skip over it. That's saying that, you know, their only intent is to vote for the president. So we really, really need you to look at the question. You should have gotten, let's see if I can find it here, a blue, here it is, booklet from the state. I know some people haven't gotten it yet, but it has the wording. It also has some pros and cons. And once again, the cons basically are fear-mongering. So, okay, how you can help, talk with your friends and neighbors. Sign on as an endorser. Once again, bit.ly/fair tax endorse, no R on the end. We really, really are looking for people to sign on as endorsers. This will be used in ads in your community saying these people whom you respect are in favor of this. So you know what, you ought to support it too. Join us in educating targeted voters. Share on social media, write a letter to the editor, please do pass it through us. Request a yard sign. That we're taking orders for yard signs, which are supposed to be available at the end of this week. And we have a bunch of them coming to Naperville. So tell me, once again, issues@lwvil.org if you would like to have a yard sign, and I'll pass on your request. Now, another thing we're asking people to do is to develop an elevator speech. For the most part, these would be about 30 seconds. Some people have more of a Willis Tower type elevator speech, which goes on for a minute, but I'm encouraging people, try to stick to about 30 seconds, which is around 60 to 70 words. Try to avoid jargon, talk about the need, the benefits, and a call to action. So here's what mine is. Our best hope of funding programs that address problems highlighted during the COVID crisis is a fair tax. This would raise taxes on the only segment of society which has seen an increase in income in recent decades, people earning over $250,000. That's why I am voting for the fair tax, and I hope you do too.
And I would like to repeat what you said at the beginning, quoting our friend Kathy. The flat tax is not efficient. It's not sufficient. It exacerbates racial inequality and economic inequality, and it's just bad tax policy. That's way under 60 words.
Yes.
So
Any other questions in the Q&A?
I think that's kind of what we have time for.
Well, we're coming on the magic hour. So if people do think of other questions, please submit them to Becky, and she knows where we live.
That does conclude tonight's webinar, and I want to thank you all for attending tonight, and thank you, Jean, thank you, Anne, for that wonderful discussion about the Fair Tax Amendment, the Illinois Fair Tax Amendment. Just a word, this was recorded, so the link will be sent out via email. It'll be posted on our website, and you can also find it on our local chapter, the Naperville League of Women Voter Facebook page. We also have a lot of resources that are available to you by going to the League of Women Voter website, as well as our Facebook page. Thank you so much for attending. We really appreciate the support. Have a great night.
Bye.